Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video we're going to be restoring this 1960s Marples traditional marking gauge. Hope you enjoy. I did look up roughly the age, and it's around the 1960s at some point, where they still had this clear little thumb knob on here that actually had Marples written on it. The later ones, that Marples marking disappeared. If we have a look at this gauge, we can see that the thumb screw does up to hold this headstock in place, and it slides up and down on here, and it's a very basic design. And if you have a nice fine pin here, or some of the traditional ones had a little cutter here, it's going to perform just as well as a wheel marking gauge in 90% of cases, especially if it's got a very fine pin here. Now, let's just take this headstock off. Now, you could see that it was a little bit tight to take off the bottom end here, and I see that as a good thing, which means that if this does come loose, it's not going to come off the bottom of the main rod stock, which in most cases we're probably only working in about this sort of gap area here anyway, so that's actually fine, so I'm not going to adjust that part there. If we take a close look at this headstock, I'm just going to quickly take that thumb screw out. If we look at this headstock, we can see that we have these two brass rods here held in by these steel screws here. Now, that is to allow a even surface when we're actually doing our marking here. Even if the wood warps, we've still got this as a decent reference point here. Now on this, they're a little loose, so we'll have to look at doing those screws up a little bit before we do just a tiny bit of work to restore this. Now, we see this here, this scattered part just here. That is amber shellac that was on this originally. When I looked this up in the booklet online, it said that it had a polished headstock, so that accounts for the shellac being on here, and they would have polished that up so it was nice and shiny. But when it comes to the rod stock, because you're getting that locked down with this thumb screw, we don't really want to finish on this. You could put a little bit of oil, but for the most part these would have stayed just straight timber, just so they've got a nice grippy consistency to them. And if they ever did split or wear out, you could have just made a new one to actually fit the headstock. It was no big deal. So what I'm going to have to do is, because I'm pretty sure this is shellac, and there's a little bit of glue just here and just here, so we're going to have to give this a little quick cleanup. And we'll tighten up these two strips on top here first, make sure that we've got them down nice and tight. If we can't pull them down quite as tight as we'll like, I'll drop a little bit of super glue behind it to actually hold them down. So it's important to get a screwdriver that'll fit these, and this one is just big enough to fit into these. And they're going down a few turns, and that's actually closing those little gaps up just there, which means there's probably going to be no more work that we need to actually do on these. Now, what I will do is get my flat surface out and give this a sand when we're finished, and it'll clean this brass up, bring it up looking nice and new again, and take some of this little paint bits off here. But next, let's get on to removing the shellac. Now, I keep this old chisel around. It's got a plastic handle. It's not a bad chisel, but I just keep this. It's got a flat edge used as kind of a scraper, and sharpish edges on the back, and I use this to remove shellac. So you want it blunt so you don't cut yourself. Now, we can see here that just scraping across the surface here, this shellac, because it's no longer adhered to the surface, we took that off nice and quickly. And this is my preferred way to remove shellac because it's a very quick and easy process. So what we're going to do is run around here quickly with this, remove what we can remove, and this is always going to be my #1 way of removing shellac and any build-up globs of glue like you just saw me remove just here. And you can see there's a little stubborn piece here, which is that glue that was on here, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to scrape that off. It's held on there pretty well, so I'll have to clean that up in a minute. So now we can see that shellac is actually off here for the most part. So shellac is alcohol based, so therefore using a little bit of steel wool, which is fine abrasive, and some alcohol, in this case denatured alcohol or methylated spirits, we'll rub that surface over. It'll clean it up. It's a very good thing to use to clean up any wooden tools, wooden hand planes, all that sort of thing. And it'll remove any of the residue of shellac that's not on there. And if you didn't have a chisel that you wanted to use to scrape it like that, this should remove the majority of any of the flaking shellac. But as I said, it is easier just to scrape it off and be careful with scraping it off. So just a little bit of denatured alcohol, wet it quite well, and then we'll rub the surface first. And this is just going to help clean all of this up. It'll take any final dirt off here that we don't want, and it might get the last of that little bit of shellac just here that I was struggling with. Now the reason I was struggling there a little bit is you can see there's a W on here, which I'm pretty sure is a maker's mark of some form, and it's kind of stuck into it, so yeah, I think that might be why. In any case, this is a great way to clean it up if you don't want to go for a full restoration. Now I've got a little bit of glue just daubed here, so keep your thumb down out of the way. I'm going to bring my marking knife in here and scrape it. There we go, got it straight off. So when you're using knives like this, safety, because you go like that, you can't readily cut your thumb if you keep it down. So you can actually lock it in behind something like that, so if you do slip, you're coming here and you won't cut yourself. So now we want to let that dry for a few minutes. While we've got the denatured alcohol out, I'm going to give the stock a bit of a rub down and a clean down. Now that's going to take any of the bits of dirt and stuff. You can see how there's some little bits of dirt and whatnot on it from years of use or years of just sitting around. Now if your steel wool does break down, just replace it. This probably doesn't need any more work on it now. As I said, we can add a little bit of linseed oil to this, or boiled linseed oil. I wouldn't add a paste wax coat to it because that's going to mean that screw's not going to bite down quite as well as I would like, because I don't want it to move at all. But you can add that oil coat. Now, when we get our sandpaper out, we're going to clean up that little pin up here as well. Just take the rust off that because we're restoring it, right? If you've got sandpaper like this that's got the fabric backing, you can just pull a little section off to actually do this part. These wooden screw clamps are perfect for holding something like this, just where you need a little bit of stability when you're working on it like this. So it's just a matter of using a little piece, working yourself around it. Until we've got most of that rust off that we can see. Now, what I want to do is just release this, turn it over, and we'll get the back side of this pin as well. Now, I'm going to turn this back over, and we want to make sure that this is sharp, so it's going to operate the way we want. So I'm going to bring you right in. I'm going to grab a small file and we're going to sharpen this up. I'm actually just going to use my flat auger file here because it's my finest, and I'm just going to try and keep it as flat as I can along here. I'll try and get it close up for you so you can see this in a sec. But what I've done is I've just put a flat on this side of it. Now, I know this is circular, but we can actually come in and just put a flat on this side as well. And we're looking for no light to be reflecting right off the top, so we know we've sharpened it to the top. And what we've ended up with is a flat on this side, a flat on that side, but a flat cutting edge on top here. And that helps to remove some of that V shape that you get when you've got just a round pin dragging through, and it helps it to be more of a cutting gauge. And I find that this adjustment that I've done when I've used them in the past actually works quite well. So we're going to make this operate just like our wheel cutting gauge. I want to just give a quick sanding to the top of this. It'll polish up this and take that little bit of paint off, ready for some finish. So it's just a simple process. Now I'm trying to sand this evenly so I don't put it out of square. That's why you see me moving it back and forwards, trying to sand the same amount. Now we can see we've almost polished up. We just need a little bit more on this side, so I'm just going to sand a little bit further. Maybe move into a new part. And I'm trying to go with the grain. So I can see I've still got a little bit here, so I'm just going to go a little bit more on that for a second. So this is pretty flat, but obviously I haven't quite got in on that last bit of brass there. So the option here is you could run through different grits. I don't mind if it has that slight scratch look. That's my personal preference. If you guys want this to look nice, shiny and polished, run through the grits of sandpaper up to maybe 1000 grit and it'll look pretty good. But I'm going to do one last process here before we move on and put a finish on this. What I have here is just some metal honing compound. This is the liquid stuff. This is Tormek paste. You can use Autosol, anything like that. And we're going to polish up that brass slightly with a little bit of this paste. Now I'm almost out here, but you obviously only need a little daub on there. We're just going to run back and forwards on these brass pits. Now this is going to put dirt back onto the wood, and so we'll follow this up with a little bit of alcohol just to clean it up. So now we just need a rag. So you can see that's nice and polished, but now we want to obviously give that a clean. Now if you're worried about that getting into the pores and it not being able to come off like I just got it off there, you could probably do a light just sealing coat of shellac around this before you polished it up, but that's up to you. So if we look at this now, we can see that it's nice and shiny there as we want. Now I just need to do a quick cleanup on the rest of this, just a quick wipe over. So it's now ready for our shellac. So let's get this out of the way. I've just had my shellac brush soaking in this little pot of alcohol because it went all hard, and because the shellac's broken down by the alcohol, it made my brush soft so I can use it. So we can see that's all flexible and good to use. What I've got here is just a little bit of 2-pound shellac that I've mixed up myself. This is a blonde or white shellac. It's just a almost clear shellac. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. If you had some amber shellac and that's what you wanted to use to make it look more traditional, go for it. We're just looking for a couple of light coats on here. You can put the shellac over the brass if you want to as well. It doesn't really matter. It'll help to protect it and keep everything nice and even. Now for a small amount like this, I'm just going to pour it into the lid like that, and now we can apply it. Now since this is an all natural finish here, you can decide to wear gloves if you want. I'm not too worried. So we're just going to apply it on top. Try not to get it in the hole here. I'm just going to set it on end there, it'll help it dry a little bit quicker. Now, this first coat dries extremely quick. It's essentially just a flash coat. It soaks into the grain, sort of re-moisturizes the grain a little bit, and especially on the end grains here, it's going to soak in quite a bit more. So you might want to put a little bit of extra coating on the end grain if required. So that's now dry to the touch. That took all of maybe 2 minutes. And so then we just want to apply a second coat, and that's probably all I'm going to apply to this. You don't need to go crazy with the coats, but you can build up as many coats on here as you would like. So this is almost dry now. I think we might as well just go and put a little wiped oil coat over the stock. So we're just going to get a little bit like that. We're not going to need much for this. And we're just going to wipe it over the surface. Again, depending on what oil you're using, you might want to use gloves with this. I know this is raw linseed oil, so it's nice and safe. Just get a little bit on the stock and rub the surface over. This is going to help to give a little bit of a polish to it and just even out that shellac finish. You don't need a lot of paste wax here, but you do want to lubricate the steel wool and give it enough that it will give a little bit of a sheen once it's finished. I will quite often just use a horseshoe brush like this, just a shoe polishing brush. You can let that dry a little bit more, or you can just come in and just take it off straight away. That's really up to you. You'll get a little bit more of a shine and a sheen if you let it dry on there a little bit longer. Just like a polish that you'd use on your car, you let it dry to the touch. But quite often with these sort of restorations, I don't like to leave it on there too much because I don't want too much of a sheen, so I just tend to put it on and then, as you can see, as we've been talking, just rub that off and then just find another clean rag, usually a cloth rag or old shirt or something like that, and just give it a final wipe over. And we can see that's come up pretty shiny all over. It's got a nice little sort of matte sheen to it on top of that shellac, and now it's nice and protected. But you can see that we haven't taken all of the history out of it. There's still age marks and a few dings and dents and stuff, but we've just restored that shellac finish. Now it couldn't be easier to put this one back together. Now you just want to make sure that you get this the correct way around in here. So you want to look, this is the rounded side, which happens to be the back of this stock. It's more rounded than the front, and that's the way it goes on here. So we push it on, check that we're moving it up and down and it's freely moving on the stock like this, like we want. And then we can go ahead and put the screw back in like so. You can see that we have it all beautifully restored, and although it doesn't look too different from what it was, it's going to be more functional, and now it's your tool because you've done it and prepared it yourself. You've made it your own. So before I round out this video, what I'm going to do is just grab a piece of wood here and I'll show you how well that sharpened cutter now marks. So when using these to mark the timber, we want to hold it usually over the top like this, and because of the way the pin is here, you don't want to dig it in particularly deep, so you want to do some light passes. So if we do that, we want to come in so it barely touches, and we can slightly pull it and keep going deeper and deeper with our cuts. And we can see that if we don't push it down too deep to start with, we actually get a pretty clean cut line, as you can see here. So there you have it, folks. There's a fairly quick restoration project there for a gauge that'll serve you well for many years to come, and now you also know how to sharpen it as well and convert them to make them operate a little bit better than just the straight scratch subscribe line. So if you'd like to continue supporting me, please consider liking and subscribing down below. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon and also on Instagram. And if you'd like to see some more restoration videos such as this one here, please check out the playlist up here where I have all my restoration videos. Bye for now.